The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Commander Sarah Mitchell walked toward the briefing room. Her boots clicked against the polished floor with the confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and determination. At 34, she was one of the youngest female commanders in the Navy, but her record spoke louder than her age ever could. The briefing room buzzed with tension as senior officers gathered for the quarterly review meeting. General Harrison, a man whose reputation preceded him like storm clouds, sat at the head of the long oak table. His steel-gray eyes surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of a predator. Known for his old-school military approach and his particular disdain for what he called diversity experiments in the armed forces, Harrison had made it clear he believed women had no place in combat roles. Sarah took her seat among the other commanders, noting the subtle shift in atmosphere when she entered. Conversations became more hushed, glances more pointed. She had grown accustomed to being the only woman in rooms full of men who questioned her presence, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air that suggested something significant was about to unfold. The meeting began with routine reports. Supply chain updates, personnel transfers, and mission briefings filled the first hour. Sarah presented her unit's performance metrics with crisp professionalism, her voice steady as she outlined their recent operations. Her team had achieved a 97% mission success rate over the past quarter, numbers that should have impressed any reasonable commanding officer. But General Harrison was not known for being reasonable when it came to female officers. As Sarah concluded her presentation, she noticed Harrison's expression hadn't changed. His face remained a mask of skepticism, his fingers drumming impatiently against the table. The other officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension building like pressure in a submarine diving too deep. "Commander Mitchell," Harrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Your numbers are certainly impressive on paper." The pause before impressive was deliberate, loaded with doubt that hung in the air like smoke. Sarah straightened in her chair, meeting his gaze directly. She had learned early in her career that backing down from confrontation only invited more aggression. "Thank you, sir," she replied evenly. "My team has worked hard to achieve these results." Harrison leaned back in his chair, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the kind of smile that made subordinates nervous, the expression of a man about to deliver what he believed would be a devastating blow. "Tell me, Commander," he continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone that made several officers wince. "In all your successful missions, how many confirmed kills do you have personally?" The question hit the room like a depth charge. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Every person present understood the implication behind the general's words. He wasn't asking about her tactical knowledge, her leadership abilities, or her strategic thinking. He was questioning her worth as a warrior based on a single, brutal metric. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze in the room. She knew this moment would define not just her own career, but potentially the future of every woman who might follow in her footsteps. The general's question wasn't really about kill counts, it was about whether women belonged in combat roles at all. The other officers sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Commander Johnson, who had served with Sarah on 3 deployments, clenched his fists under the table. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, a decorated veteran himself, looked as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. They all knew Harrison's reputation for ending careers with a single pointed comment. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing through possible responses. She could deflect with humor, redirect with statistics, or simply provide the numerical answer he was seeking. But something deeper stirred within her, a recognition that this moment demanded more than a simple response to a loaded question. Years of training, combat experience, and leadership challenges had led to this instant. Every slight she had endured, every doubt she had overcome, every barrier she had broken down had prepared her for this confrontation. The general thought he was cornering her with an impossible question, but he had no idea what he was about to unleash. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, marking seconds that felt like hours. Harrison's smug expression suggested he believed he had already won this exchange, that he had exposed what he saw as the fundamental weakness of allowing women in combat roles. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. Sarah looked around the room one final time before responding, her eyes meeting those of each officer present. She saw fear in some faces, anticipation in others, and something that looked like hope in a few. The weight of representation pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy pack on a long march, but she had carried heavier burdens before. "General Harrison," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I understand why you might think kill count is the most important metric for evaluating a combat officer's effectiveness." Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly, his expression suggesting he was pleased that she was acknowledging what he saw as obvious truth. Several officers shifted in their seats, wondering if Sarah was about to concede defeat in this verbal sparring match. "However," she continued, "I'd like to share something with you that might provide a different perspective on what it means to be effective in combat." The general's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the defensive response he had expected. He had anticipated either stammering excuses or an admission that she lacked the killer instinct necessary for true military leadership. Instead, Sarah seemed to be taking control of the conversation. 3 months ago, my unit was deployed to a hostile zone where intelligence suggested we would encounter significant enemy resistance, Sarah began, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone recounting a mission report. "Our orders were to secure a strategic position and hold it until reinforcements arrived." She paused, allowing the room to absorb the setup. Every officer present had been in similar situations, and they could immediately understand the dangers such a mission would entail. "When we arrived at the designated coordinates, we discovered something our intelligence hadn't revealed. The enemy position wasn't just a military outpost. It was a compound where they were holding 47 civilians captive, including women and children." Harrison's expression began to change, though he tried to maintain his skeptical demeanor. The other officers leaned forward slightly, drawn into the narrative despite their attempts to remain professionally detached. "At that point, I had a choice," Sarah continued. "I could follow standard protocol, call for additional support, and wait for orders. The safe play would have been to establish a perimeter and let someone else make the difficult decisions." She stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and confident. Walking to the tactical display board at the front of the room, she began sketching out the compound layout with quick, precise strokes. But those civilians didn't have time for bureaucratic delays. Intelligence reports indicated the enemy was planning to execute the hostages within hours as part of a propaganda campaign. Every minute we delayed meant increased risk to innocent lives. The room was completely silent now, even Harrison's drumming fingers had stopped. Sarah's narrative had transformed the atmosphere from confrontational to captivated, as if she had cast a spell over the assembled officers. "So I made a decision," she continued, turning back to face the group. "Instead of launching a direct assault that would likely result in civilian casualties, I ordered my team to split into 3 units. One group would create a diversion on the eastern perimeter, drawing enemy fire and attention. Another would secure the compound's exit routes. The third unit, which I led personally, would infiltrate the building and extract the hostages." She moved back to her seat, but remained standing, her presence commanding the room's complete attention. "The operation took 6 hours from start to finish. During that time, my team members engaged multiple enemy combatants. We neutralized threats, secured objectives, and accomplished our mission goals. But here's what I want you to understand about kill counts, General Harrison." Sarah's voice grew stronger, more passionate, as she approached the heart of her response. "In those 6 hours, I personally fired my weapon exactly 3 times. Each shot was calculated, precise, and necessary to save lives. But the real measure of our success wasn't how many enemies we killed. It was the 47 civilians who went home to their families that night." Several officers nodded unconsciously, recognizing the truth in her words. Commander Johnson allowed himself a small smile, knowing exactly which operation she was describing and remembering the commendations that had followed. "You see, sir," Sarah continued, "while you're focused on kill counts, I've been focused on something more important. Mission success. Team safety. Protecting the innocent. These are the metrics that truly matter in combat leadership." Harrison's face had grown pale, but his jaw remained set in stubborn defiance. He wasn't ready to concede this argument, even though he could sense the room's mood shifting away from him. Furthermore, Sarah pressed on, I've led 53 combat missions over the past 4 years. In every single one, I brought every member of my team home alive. Can you say the same about your combat record, General? The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at a duel. Harrison's kill count during his own combat years was legendary among certain circles, but so was his casualty rate. Several promising young officers had died under his command during operations that prioritized aggression over tactical intelligence. Sarah wasn't finished. She had endured too many years of subtle discrimination, too many questioning looks, too many suggestions that she didn't belong in her uniform. This moment represented more than just defending herself. It was about defending every woman who had ever been told she wasn't tough enough, wasn't warrior enough, wasn't enough. I understand that some people believe warfare is simply about eliminating enemies, she said, her gaze never leaving Harrison's face. But real military leadership is about much more than that. It's about making impossible decisions under pressure. It's about inspiring your team to perform beyond their perceived limitations. It's about achieving objectives while minimizing losses on all sides. The general's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in his career, he found himself speechless in a military briefing. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Sarah delivered the words that would echo through the naval base for years to come. Her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction as she looked directly into General Harrison's eyes. My kill count, General, is 0. And I'm proud of that number. The statement hit the room like a thunderclap. Officers exchanged glances of shock, confusion, and growing understanding. Harrison's face cycled through several expressions as he processed what she had just said. But here's what you need to understand, Sarah continued without missing a beat. Those 3 shots I mentioned? They were warning shots. Precise shots designed to disable, not kill. Every enemy combatant my team encountered during that hostage rescue was neutralized through superior tactics, strategic positioning, and non-lethal force. She moved closer to the table, her presence commanding and her voice growing stronger with each word. You want to know what real strength looks like, General? It's having the power to kill and choosing not to. It's finding ways to win that don't require taking lives unnecessarily. It's being so skilled, so prepared, so tactically superior that you can achieve total victory without becoming a killer. Commander Johnson couldn't suppress his admiration any longer. He had been present during several of Sarah's operations and had witnessed firsthand her innovative approaches to conflict resolution. Her methods had become legendary among the ranks for their effectiveness and humanity. Every single enemy combatant we encountered that day surrendered when they realized they were outmaneuvered and outgunned, Sarah explained. They're now providing valuable intelligence that has prevented 3 major terrorist attacks and saved countless innocent lives. Dead enemies can't tell you where the next threat is coming from. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes found himself nodding in agreement. He had reviewed the intelligence reports from Sarah's operations and knew the strategic value of her approach extended far beyond any single mission. But, General, Sarah said, her tone shifting to something that bordered on pity, I understand why this concept might be difficult for you to grasp. Your generation was taught that warfare is about body counts and overwhelming force. You measure success by how many enemies you can eliminate. Harrison's face flushed red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He wasn't accustomed to being lectured by subordinates, especially not female subordinates who challenged his fundamental beliefs about military effectiveness. My generation, Sarah continued, understands that modern warfare is about intelligence, precision, and strategic thinking. We know that every life taken unnecessarily creates new enemies, new grievances, new cycles of violence that our children will have to fight. She gestured toward the tactical display where the compound layout remained sketched out in precise detail. Those 47 civilians we rescued? They returned to their communities with stories about American forces who risked their lives to save innocents. They became ambassadors for peace instead of martyrs for revenge. That's the kind of victory that lasts, General. That's the kind of success that actually makes our nation safer. The room was completely captivated now. Even Harrison seemed caught up in the power of her narrative, though his pride prevented him from showing open agreement. "You asked about my kill count as if it were a measure of my worth as a warrior," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone of quiet dignity. "But, I would argue that anyone can kill, General. It takes no special skill to end a life. What takes real expertise, real courage, real warrior spirit is finding ways to win without killing." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before delivering her next point. "In my 4 years of combat leadership, I've captured or neutralized over 200 enemy combatants. Every single one of them is alive today. Some are in prison, some have been turned as intelligence assets, and some have actually defected to our side entirely. Can you imagine the intelligence value, the strategic advantage, the long-term benefits of that approach?" Several officers were now taking notes, recognizing the profound implications of what Sarah was describing. Her methods weren't just morally superior, they were tactically brilliant and strategically advantageous. "Moreover," she continued, "my team's reputation for precision and non-lethal tactics has become a psychological weapon in itself. Enemy forces in our operational theater now surrender more quickly because they know they'll be treated with dignity and their lives will be spared. Fear of death makes people fight harder. Hope for survival makes them give up faster." Harrison finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. "But, combat requires." "Requires what, sir?" Sarah interrupted gently but firmly. "Requires bloodlust? Requires a willingness to take lives unnecessarily? I would submit that true combat leadership requires something much more difficult. It requires the wisdom to know when killing is necessary and when it isn't. It requires the skill to achieve victory through superior strategy rather than superior firepower." She returned to her seat, but her posture remained commanding, her presence still dominating the room. "You wanted to embarrass me with your question about kill counts," she said, her voice now carrying a note of sadness. "You thought you could expose some weakness, some fundamental flaw in my character or my capabilities. But what you've actually done is given me the opportunity to explain why my approach to warfare is more effective than yours." The other officers sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of power dynamics that had just occurred. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate a female officer had become a masterclass in modern military philosophy and leadership. "I don't kill because I don't have to kill," Sarah concluded. "And that, General Harrison, is what real power looks like." The aftermath of Sarah's response created a silence so profound that the gentle hum of the air conditioning system seemed to roar. General Harrison sat frozen in his chair, his usual commanding presence deflated like a punctured balloon. The smug confidence that had characterized his demeanor just minutes earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like respect grudgingly given. Admiral Peterson, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, finally cleared his throat. As the most senior officer present, he recognized that this moment would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The way he handled it would either validate Sarah's revolutionary approach to combat leadership or allow Harrison's outdated thinking to reassert itself. "Commander Mitchell," Peterson said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of careful consideration, "would you be willing to share more details about your operational methodologies? I believe this discussion has revealed some strategic advantages that warrant further examination." Sarah nodded respectfully, understanding that she had been given an opportunity to cement her position and potentially influence military doctrine for generations to come. "Certainly, Admiral. My approach is based on what I call victory through intelligence superiority. Instead of relying primarily on firepower and aggression, my teams focus on comprehensive reconnaissance, psychological warfare, and precision tactics that achieve objectives with minimal casualties on all sides." She stood again, moving to the tactical display board with the confidence of someone who had just won a decisive battle. "For example, in the hostage rescue operation I mentioned, we spent 48 hours conducting surveillance before making our move. We identified guard patterns, communication schedules, supply routes, and structural weaknesses. By the time we initiated the operation, we knew exactly where every enemy combatant was positioned and how they would likely respond to various scenarios." Commander Johnson, emboldened by the shift in room dynamics, spoke up for the first time during the meeting. I can confirm the effectiveness of Commander Mitchell's methods. I've served alongside her team on multiple deployments, and their mission success rate is unprecedented in my experience." Several other officers murmured agreement, creating a ripple effect of support that further isolated Harrison's position. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes added his own endorsement, describing how Sarah's intelligence gathering techniques had prevented casualties in operations under his command as well. "The key insight," Sarah continued, "is that modern warfare isn't just about defeating enemies, it's about winning hearts and minds, gathering actionable intelligence, and creating sustainable peace. Every life we take unnecessarily makes our job harder in the long term." She turned to address Harrison directly, her tone respectful but firm. "General, your experience and service record are impressive, and I don't mean to diminish the sacrifices you've made for our country. But the nature of warfare has evolved since your combat years. Today's enemies are more sophisticated, more networked, and more capable of turning our tactical victories into strategic defeats through propaganda and recruitment." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he seemed to be listening rather than simply waiting for his turn to respond. The profound shift in room dynamics had apparently forced him to reconsider his assumptions about both Sarah and modern military strategy. "When we kill unnecessarily," Sarah explained, "we create martyrs. When we destroy communities in pursuit of military objectives, we create refugees who become breeding grounds for new terrorist organizations. When we prioritize body counts over strategic thinking, we win battles but lose wars." Admiral Peterson leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the strategic implications of what he was hearing. "Commander, have you documented these methodologies? I'd like to see formal reports on your operational approaches and their outcomes." "Yes, sir. I've prepared comprehensive after-action reports for every mission, including detailed analyses of how non-lethal approaches affected both immediate outcomes and long-term strategic objectives. The data consistently shows better results across multiple metrics when we prioritize precision over aggression." The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officers began discussing the implications among themselves. What had started as an attempt to embarrass Sarah had evolved into a serious strategic planning session about the future of military operations. Harrison finally spoke, his voice notably lacking its earlier arrogance. "Commander Mitchell, I may have misjudged your approach to combat operations." It wasn't a full apology, but, coming from Harrison, it represented a seismic shift in perspective. Sarah recognized the significance of his words and responded with appropriate grace. "Thank you, General. I understand that my methods challenge traditional thinking about warfare. But I believe our responsibility as military leaders extends beyond winning individual battles. We need to think about the kind of world we're creating with our actions." Admiral Peterson stood, signaling that the meeting was reaching its conclusion. "I want formal presentations prepared on these tactical innovations. Commander Mitchell, you'll lead a working group to develop training protocols based on your methodologies. General Harrison, I'd like you to provide historical context and help us understand how these new approaches can build upon traditional military strengths." The assignment effectively validated Sarah's position while giving Harrison a face-saving way to contribute to the conversation rather than simply opposing it. It was a masterful bit of military diplomacy that transformed potential conflict into collaborative opportunity. As the meeting adjourned, officers filed out of the room with animated discussions about what they had witnessed. Many approached Sarah to congratulate her on her presentation and express interest in learning more about her methods. Even some of Harrison's traditional allies seemed genuinely intrigued by the strategic possibilities she had outlined. Harrison lingered after most officers had departed, approaching Sarah with obvious reluctance but unmistakable determination. "Commander," he said quietly, "I've spent 30 years believing that warrior spirit meant willingness to kill. You've shown me that maybe real warrior spirit means having the strength not to kill when you don't have to." Sarah extended her hand, which Harrison shook with surprising warmth. "General, the greatest warriors in history weren't remembered for how many people they killed. They were remembered for how many they saved and what they built after the fighting stopped." As Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave the briefing room, she reflected on how a moment of intended humiliation had become an opportunity to reshape military thinking. The general's mocking question about kill counts had backfired spectacularly, opening a door to conversations about warfare that prioritized intelligence over aggression, strategy over brutality, and long-term success over short-term satisfaction. Her response had silenced not just Harrison, but an entire way of thinking about what it meant to be a warrior. And, in that silence, new possibilities for military leadership had begun to take root.